News First, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
And top of the morning to you. This is Newsline, live as always from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo. And driving to work this morning, I noticed that it's going to be another perfect day. It's lovely. It's beautiful, the weather. And that's what you get when you live on this tropical utopia, I call it. Anyway, it's not quite utopia. But this morning, the talk of the town, if you like, is all about conflict of interests, and it's about political patronage and influence peddling. And here's this clip which was played last night on the news.
According to the report in the Deshiya newspaper, the loan is said to be the largest loan ever granted since the inception of the State Bank over the past 65 years. The loan facility has been approved in stages with the approval of the bank's Director Board and Loans Committee. When the Deshiya newspaper had made inquiries from the chairman of the State Bank, he had confirmed the truth of the matter, noting that the director had approved such a large loan to a group of private companies. However, he also claimed that this transaction had been carried out in a proper manner. The State Bank chairman was also questioned on whether there was no issue of a conflict of interest, given the connections between the director and the group of companies that had been granted the loan. However, he had said that he could not respond. Inquiries made by Newsfirst revealed that the loan of 10 billion rupees had been made to CML Workers, a construction contractor by the state-owned People's Bank. Responding to inquiries made by Newsfirst, the chairman of the large-scale loan board at People's Bank, Dr. Aminda Metsila, noted that the bank had already loaned about 50 billion rupees to this company as of 2014. He noted that the company had repaid this loan. Dr. Metsila added that accordingly, loans could be issued to the company in question with a credit limit of 50 billion rupees. According to the 2016-17 annual report of CML Workers, Jehan Amratunga is the executive vice president of the group. He is also a member of the board of directors of People's Bank and has served in that position since 2010. The chairman of the bank at the time of Amratunga's appointment was Gamini Sinarath. The company CML Workers has been awarded contracts for the construction of many government projects, including roads and bridges. Among these is a contract for the construction of a section of Stage 2 of the Central Expressway. Is it fair for an individual who serves as a director of a state bank to obtain a 10 billion rupee loan from that bank to benefit his private businesses? Is it legal? This state bank holds the money of the people of this country. Is it not their duty to properly manage this money and ensure that the people reap the benefits? Was the proper procedure followed when approving the loan of 10 billion rupees from a state bank? News First is keeping watch. More information on this will be divulged in the near future.
And our guest this morning is a huge critique of good governance and always plugs accountability, responsibility and a level playing field. And to talk about all this is he's right here in person, Proffesor Rajeeva Wijeysinghe. Good morning to you.
Morning.
You heard that?
Yeah.
What's your reaction to that?
Well, I'm surprised that people are surprised.
Why?
I mean, it has been so obvious in the last 3 years that this government has exceeded anything the last government did in terms of sleaze and corruption. And there is absolutely no culture in this country of accountability. You know, the chairman of the People's Bank, Emissary Fernando, there are those who defend him and say he was forced. You can't be forced to do anything.
Right.
You can give up. Now, okay, I mean, people look at me and say, you know, you resigned. But, you know, it's been such a relief, you know, when you go to villages and so on. I'm always told, you know, you're the only person who got out in time. You're not tainted. Everyone understands that's why the country delivered such a resounding verdict in February. But no one in this country resigns. If you remember, in India, if there's an accident, people resign. When there are allegations of sleaze, people resign. You can be brought back if it's, as you said, you didn't make money yourself. If you have been forced, then you serve your period outside. But the only way you can make it clear to the captains of crookedness, Malik Samarekwa and Ranil Wickremesinghe, is that you will not tolerate this. What has Wijeysinghe Fernando got to lose by resigning? You remember, a few months back, there was this news that when Ravi Karunanaike got into bond scamming, there are those who believe he wasn't involved too heavily in the first. But then Aloysius realized, good to have the guy on side. And the second bond scam, which was infinitely worse than the first, also involved him stopping the state bank's bidding. You remember Ronald Pereira, Hemasiri, etc. went and told the government, you know, we were told not to bid.
Because he wanted to bring the interest rates down.
And then of course Aloysius bid and got things at a much higher rate. But did anyone actually tell Ronald Pereira and Hemasiri Fernando, I forget who the third was, you know, you are scum if you actually did this with the people's money, that you lost high interest for national funds and allowed those massive funds to go to Arjun Aloysius. Now, as you know, everyone knows, nothing is proceeding in terms of the prosecutions. This bunch of clowns have now decided to revive prosecutions against the last lot. And of course what they have done has made it clear to the country at large, including the many people who wanted a less corrupt government, that you're certainly not going to get that under this lot. And therefore there'll be a rush to vote for anyone against this, which again would be a mistake, because it will be giving blank checks. So I think this country is in a very sorry situation, and I'm only sorry that, you know, no one stands up. No one protests. I mean, take Harsha De Silva. I still think the guy is honest, although he's morally not honest. How can he cope with this? You know, Harsha De Silva. You know, he used to be a champion on good governance. All he does now is when there's an appalling incident, he says, you know, under the last government, this would have been under wraps. Rubbish under the last government, everything was discussed. But, as we know very well, the result was the massive vote against the last government unexpectedly at the last election, despite its superb record of development. This government hasn't even done development.
That's the problem, Professor. You say that, you know, you can't be forced to do it. But if you take the issue of the bond, let's say, Arjuna Mahendran says, I only did, and he said this in court, I only did as I was instructed by the Prime Minister, who was the line minister. The Prime Minister himself, earlier to that, says in Parliament, I insisted the system be changed. All right. And Mahendran says, I did what he said. Now then, if you leave that as it is, and then look at this as we were just discussing now, you say that the chairman can't be forced to do it. But in a way he can be, because if the minister is his boss sort of thing, the minister says, oh come on, just let this go through, he's almost under a sort of a de facto obligation.
You're under no obligation at all. I mean, take my own case. As you know, when I was not put into Parliament, I thought I'd retire. Mahinda Samarasinha asked me to help, and I like Mahinda Samarasinha, so I agreed to do some work for him. And but I said I'll only do anything part-time. I was chairman of the TVC. The TVC progressed more in those 2 years than before or since. But do you know what happened to me? Chandrababu Veerakkadu, who was a nice boy, kept wanting me to make illegal appointments. And my DG kept saying, don't upset the minister, you know, you have to do things. I said, I'm not putting people into jobs for which they're unsuitable. I actually, let me continue. I compromised to the extent that I said, okay, even if the applications came late, let them sit the exam. When I was told they'd failed the exam, and then the minister actually said, no, their exam was crooked and the Tamils were favoured, which was a lie. But I said, okay, if he's going to make that sort of allegation, I don't want racism in this institution, let them come for the interview. They all performed appallingly, you know, because ministers just give, and I refused. When I put this forward, the DG said, I can't sign the paper. While I was abroad, I was removed. And I was removed, obviously, because Chandema Veerakode wanted to put in unsuitable people.
Yeah.
And you can refuse to do that.
Yeah.
And all you do is say no. The minister has then got to decide whether or not this is important enough to sack you. But
Right.
what's wrong with being sacked?
Yes.
You know, it's not that Hemasiri has a wife and family that need feeding.
Yeah.
You know, I remember when I resigned over Mrs. Bandanayaka's civic rights,
Yeah.
there were people who said, well, you can afford to do it.
Yeah.
I said, there are certainly lots of people who can't afford
Yeah.
to do it. But by the time you reach this level, you can afford to. And look at the number of people who wouldn't resign, even though they knew it was wrong. So you see, we don't really have a culture of accountability, individual accountability to the country. You
Yes.
know, when I'm there, I have to say, I've said this to all the ministers I've worked for.
Yeah.
I mean, if your candidates are suitable, I have no objection to taking them in, provided they satisfy the requirements.
Yeah.
But I will not give a state job to anybody who is not suitable.
Yeah.
And, you know, still you have a private office. It's a waste of money, but you put them there.
Yeah.
So that is where you expect someone like Hemasiri to have some guts. Nothing. What can you do?
Okay, but now, but you understand what I'm trying to say here. The minister is, it's like even a secretary in a ministry. Although he is the chief accounting officer, all his well-being, if you like, is in the hands of the minister. And so when the minister wants this done and that done, it's very rare that you get a secretary who will stand his ground.
Why?
Because
I stood my ground. I mean, I had a very good minister, but when
Yeah.
he told me to do something I wouldn't, I said no. And he told me
What about the secretary's obligations to his family, to educate his children, to look after his mum, dad, and God knows who else?
Secretaries don't lose their salaries.
Right.
Remember that a secretary, unlike me,
Yeah.
when I was secretary,
Yeah.
in fact, the minister said to me, other secretaries would have done it. I said, I am not any other secretary.
Right.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
But a secretary who is removed from the post of secretary
Yeah.
continues to get a salary.
Yes, because he goes into the pool.
Exactly. So you're not, you're not really giving up your money or your salary.
Yes, but
so
now-
you see, that is one point. The second, of course, and this goes back to what I said at the beginning, and when I realized this government was either stupid or wicked, was that when the new constitutional amendment came,
Yeah.
and they said they wanted an independent public service,
Yeah.
I said, why are you still keeping the secretaries appointed by the Prime Minister?
Indeed.
By the President? And you know what they said? Ranil said, oh no, there have to be exceptions. I said, there can be exceptions. Maithripala Sirisena said, you know, the last president made some bad appointments. So I said, then why are you continuing this? But neither seem to understand, because all they want is power, and civil society didn't make a fuss.
Yeah.
As you look, people have asked me why I voted for the 19th Amendment.
Yeah.
And I said, because it was better than the situation before. But if you look at the order paper for that day,
Yeah.
and they told me, why waste your time? I said, I am proposing amendments to what is wrong. And one of my amendments was that secretaries should be appointed by the Public Service Commission or by the President, but on a recommendation like everything else. If you looked at the public sector reforms proposal that I prepared, asked by the National Human Resources Development Council, they have all these changes. Who's interested? Ranil has thrown it away. I don't think the President has even read it. Austin Fernando threw it away. We are trying again hard, hoping that Uday Senviratne will do something. The OPA has taken it up. But everyone is so slow. The OPA said they'd act. I went abroad. When I came back, they had done nothing. No one cares. What can we do?
But we're about to go in for a break, Professor Rajeeva. When we come back, I want to talk to you about conflict of interest, because it seems to have been the bane of this government's program thus far. Don't go away, because we'll be back with interesting discussion about conflict of interest. After all, this is Newsline. And welcome back. It's all about conflict of interest. This government, right from day one, has indulged in conflict of interest. It all started with that absolutely scandalous bond scam, where there was a clear conflict of interest, and the Prime Minister himself acknowledged that there was a conflict of interest because he asked Arjuna Mahendran to ensure that his son-in-law was not involved in that company. And it is a tragic a state of affairs that Arjuna Mahendran didn't do as he was told to by the Prime Minister, although he himself did exactly what the Prime Minister wanted in changing the system of the bond. Now, that's a conflict of interest. Now, returning to the State Bank, and the report that was carried in the Desha newspaper yesterday, and as we reported on our news, there was a director of the company, Mr. Amaratunga, who was serving on the board of the People's Bank, and he was also on the board of this company. Now then, isn't that a clear conflict of interest? What's the explanation?
Well, of course. Was he at the meeting at which the matter was discussed?
The chairman says that they have followed procedure.
That's all he says.
Well, yes, he says that it was all done properly, according to the newspaper.
No, I mean, you see, the point is there is no understanding of what is correct. I still remember, and this is why I'm so ashamed of Ranil Wickremesinghe, because I was brought up in a tradition of utter decency. Let me give you a simple example. My mother chaired the Sri Lanka Canada Development Fund.
Yeah.
My father, who was doing some vocational training down south, applied for a loan. My mother told him, you can't.
Right.
I'm the chairman.
Ah.
And the directors of the fund actually said, no, Mrs. Wijeysinghe, why don't you stay away from the meeting?
Yeah.
Because this is a very good application. My father did a lot of work for young people.
Yeah.
My mother said, I'm sorry, you go ahead, but I'm resigning.
What is the role of...
So you see, that is essential. Now, you talked about the president, the Ranil Wickremesinghe, checking on Arjuna Aloysius.
Yeah.
He didn't.
Yeah.
He said something, then he didn't follow it up. I had this disgraceful thing the other day, and I'm so sorry because I don't know whether you know my aunt Ina De Silva, a model of integrity.
Yeah. And
I used to always think Charitra Ratwate, whatever his faults were, wasn't crooked.
Yeah.
You saw what happened about Surendra Ratwate.
Yeah.
And you saw that the papers announced that Ranil had insisted, and Kabir, on him being appointed without being reviewed.
Yeah.
And I told Chari, who's written a book on, he talks about protecting the people, and he asked me to do a review.
Yeah.
And I said, Chari, I'll have to talk about your precepts being totally different from your practice. And then he wrote to me, and I said, haven't you objected to the crookedness of this government? He said, no, you don't know what I've said in private. And he actually claimed that with Suren's appointment, the Prime Minister had nothing to do with it. But I told Chari, did you reprimand Ajit Das for doing this?
Yeah.
No answer. So all these people they're plundering the country. They're allowing
they're plundering the country. One of our viewers brought up an interesting question, and he says that we voted for the 19th Amendment. So do you not think that it was wrong for them to stop the President from removing the Prime Minister if he was not doing a good job? As we are now told, the President has no power under the 19th Amendment to remove the Prime Minister. Right now, all of us, many civil society and so on, organizations, are blaming the Prime Minister and his mates, including Manik Samaravikrama and so on, for using their influence and granting political patronage. Another viewer was asking me, how was this loan passed because Mr. Amaratunga was on the board and there was a cross-directorship, or was it because Manik Samaravikrama exercised his influence as a minister and asked for this to be looked at sympathetically, or is it a combination of both?
I have no idea, but I know on first principles, and you yourself said the emissary was forced. So who forced him? You basically said it was the minister.
Right.
I don't know. I'm not privy to the way it works. I do know that Malik is an utter crook. I remember when we were working together. He had this lovely line. I said, I do hope you're not bringing crooks like the Ratmarapana back.
Right.
Because of, you remember the deals that happened under 2001 and 2? And Malik said to me rather sanctimoniously, that's the standard of this government. Harsha De Silva being the prime sort of exponent of sanctimoniousness. Malik said, you mustn't blame Tilak. he wasn't responsible for those deals.
Yeah.
And I now begin to believe that that cynical young man was actually telling me it was him,
Right.
Malik himself.
Right.
Because of course, you know, the problem, as Ranil doesn't sometimes understand, is when you're filling the coffers of the party, you fill your own coffers, as we saw with, you know, Aloysius having paid off the party debt.
Yeah.
Ranil doesn't need to have money in his account because the party pays all his debts, as you know. You yourself told me you checked once about where he'll stay in a 5-star hotel, and he couldn't really answer the question properly.
The worrying part of this loan or this facility granted, the newspaper says 10 billion loaned to this company, to MTL, to CML or MTD, while they are also involved in the Central Expressway project, which is funded by the state banks. So this viewer is asking, is it the banks that are paying for this? What's going on?
I mean, the whole thing is obvious, as you and I know.
Yeah.
We brought this up 3 or 4 years ago, even on the roads.
Yeah.
You remember how the Prime Minister, having announced no more unsolicited projects, promptly took up unsolicited projects?
Yeah.
You know that the cost of those new highways were much more than what the Rajapaksas had paid.
That's right.
And obviously they have found that those are the best way of making money, the highways. And unfortunately, unlike the Rajapaksa government, they're not even delivering the highways. They're very, very slow.
Yeah.
You know, I was down south the other day. You know, the great achievement is Mahinda Rajapaksa got the southern highway, which had been stuck for 10 years, off the ground. The Katanayake
But even
highway.
that was ever so expensive.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But you know, one of the reasons it was expensive, as you probably know,
it was, I think, $10 million a kilometer.
You see, what actually happened there is they changed the route halfway through.
Yeah.
And I was at a meeting with the ADB, which was talking about corruption.
Yeah.
And this sweet Dutchman explained their procedures against corruption and the appeals. And I said, hang on, you know there was an appeal against your decision.
Yeah.
And the appeal adjudicator found against the bank.
Yeah.
But you ignored that decision. So you see, the ADB also gives in to governments that once things changed.
Yeah.
You know, the route was moved because I think the argument was that a politician's mistress's house was to be destroyed. Then Vajraabhewardena came in and changed it again.
Here's an interesting one.
The money just went up and up and up. But the highway was delivered.
Yeah.
Don't forget the changes.
Yeah.
The change happened in Chandrika's time, then in Ranil's time when he was minister, and then finally Mahinda Rajapaksa at least got it done.
Yeah.
So the costs escalated, all 3 governments were responsible.
Right.
But at least it was done.
At least it was done. Now then, here's one. Viewer, I am sitting here feeling angry and hopeless. What is the alternative the ordinary people have?
The alternative the ordinary people have is to agitate for the changes that were promised. A change in the electoral system, because this electoral system throws up people who necessarily need money and will do anything to get it. A change in the system of accountability. But, you know, the papers haven't even publicized the proposals. You know, one viewer asked about the powers given to the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
A, the Constitution does allow the President to sack the Prime Minister. It's a matter of interpretation, but if you go through it, it's just that Maithripala Sirisena hasn't got the guts. Secondly, when these changes were proposed, I kept pointing out that they are anomalous. Sometimes they say consultation, sometimes they say on the advice of. And I actually brought this up with the then opposition. And you know what Anura Priyadarshana told me when I made these protests? You know,
were you in Parliament?
I was in Parliament when the amendment was passed.
Did you vote for it?
Of course I voted for it, because it was better than it had been before. But if you look at the amendments I proposed that day, they tried to iron out the anomalies. When I told Anura Priyadarshana, giving too much power to the Prime Minister, he said, if we don't give him that, he'll start crying. I mean, stupid, isn't it? This is the Anura Priyadarshana Yapa who now understands the mistake. But when I told him at the time, they were all in a rush. The whole thing was done in a rush. There was no proper committee stage. And nobody bothered. I still remember at one point when we got, you know, the Jampati, who was another sleight of hand man, and slipped in again, all power goes to the Prime Minister. Insisted on, let me finish, insisted on removing it. But GL was mandated to work with him. GL allowed all these other clauses to slip through. And when I told GL, what have you done? He said, I didn't notice. What can you do with people like that?
Exactly. Chuck them in the dustbin, really, is what I'd do. Now then, we have to answer this, ask this question. a viewer is asking us, how easy is it for these big companies with sort of political patronage, 10 billion, they say, that this company got, according to the Desha paper, 10 billion. And this viewer is complaining that the level of detail required by a bank for an ordinary member of the public to borrow $1 million or $2 million is so very fraught with detail. And yet these people managed to get 10 billion. And it's a state bank. And why is it that the state banks are being virtually forced to give money out in this way when they're struggling with their own capital adequacy ratios and so on? And like Sri Lankan Airlines, they've been forced to give so much of money. Especially these state banks have been forced to fund Sri Lankan Airlines. But if Sri Lankan Airlines was a private company, Sri Lankan Airlines Private Limited, right, run by businessmen, they wouldn't have been able to get these loans.
No, you're absolutely right. But you see, part of the problem is the state banks, which were set up to help the people of this country. The People's Bank is a case in point. You know, when it was set up, Donald Kannanga, etc., it was designed to help the small entrepreneur. And what has happened now is they are used as tools of politics. So on the one hand, if you have a lot of money, you can get more, like these companies, because that's part of what the government thinks keeps it going. The big flagship government companies like Sri Lankan. Second, the friends who have connections, like this particular man. Then you get the lowest level where there are sudden handouts, where they give loans and write them off. But the purpose of this was a developmental, so that the middle class person who wants to develop a company, to maybe develop some property, and has perfectly good collateral, doesn't have a chance. They are
but the private, back to this thing about the 19th Amendment. Now, you know, a private company such as Maharaja Group, in connection with the 19th Amendment, we spent our own money, and we fought those parts about the controls on the media that was being proposed at the time. We did what we wanted to do, and those are our ideals and our end game, if you like, and our end game is to represent the people. But here it's a sad situation where we have people like Malik Samaravikrama who are not elected. They've been appointed on the basis of a friendship with Ranil Wickremesinghe, who just happens to be the Prime Minister, right? And they have completely and utterly disregarded this whole notion of conflict of interest. They've taken conflict of interest to a different standard. And with elections looming, does it look like they've got away with it? Presidential Commission of Inquiry into the bonds, the inquiry into Sri Lankan Airlines, they're talking about $1 million here and $1 million there. Why are they not talking about the big ticket items, like the cancellation charges that were paid to cancel the aircraft? These are in hundreds of millions of dollars.
You're absolutely right, and you're perfectly right, they'll get away with it unless there is an absolute change. And I don't think that's likely.
Change where?
No, if at the next election.
Yeah.
If you get an entirely new, non-traditional politician dispensation.
Yeah.
But I begin to think that's impossible to conceive of, and sometimes it goes with baggage that is unacceptable. So I'm afraid your listener who's in a state of despair is paralleled by myself.
We've nearly run out of time, but here's a lovely one. Viewer says, even when Rajeeva Wijeysinghe was an MP, he drove around in his old yellow Fiat. Respect. On the note of the expose by Desha newspaper, I want to give you the last word. Newsfirst is in possession of some information which is very relevant to the case in question, and will be exposing that in the fullness of time. We'll be covering that on our news, obviously. And thank you, Proffesor Rajeeva. Respect. I'm absolutely amazed about that thing. Even when he was an MP, he drove around in his old yellow Fiat.
That's a very kind thing to say, but that's not strictly true. When I did my official work, I had an official vehicle.
Right.
But of course, I don't own a vehicle, but the yellow Fiat is the one I used. It actually belongs to my driver.
Oh.
And I'm very happy in it, actually. It's a lovely car.
Has your driver still got the yellow Fiat?
He's got the yellow Fiat, and I've told him don't sell it under any circumstances. He bought it for 18,000.
There you are. At least
wonderful vehicle.
It's not all doom and gloom here on Newsline. We do put a smile on people's faces, and thanks to you, your driver's yellow Fiat, I think we've just about done that.
Okay.
But thank you very much, Proffesor Rajeeva Wijeysinghe, and that's it. We're sorry we overran, but there's so much to discuss and so little time to do it in. Take care and God bless.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.